Everything in Britain feels full. The trains, the doctors' waiting rooms, the schools, the roads, the queue at Tesco. Everywhere you go, the country feels like it's bursting at the seams. But here's the weird part. The UK actually has fewer people per square kilometre than Germany. Less than the Netherlands, less than Belgium. And yet nobody in Seoul is writing op-eds about the country being full. They're too busy actually building things. So why does Britain, which isn't actually that crowded, feel so full when statistically it really isn't? The answer isn't what either side of the immigration debate wants you to hear. Let's start with the numbers because almost every argument about this gets the numbers wrong. The UK's population today sits at just over 68 million people. In 2000, it was 59 million. That's a gain of roughly 9 million people in 25 years. Big number. Sounds dramatic, but stretched across a quarter of a century, it's an average growth rate of around 0.6% per year. That's slower than the United States, slower than Canada, slower than Australia. So population growth alone can't explain why Britain feels full. Other countries have grown faster and don't have the same sense of collapse. Something else is going on. Here's what actually happened. Between 1970 and 2000, Britain built houses, hospitals, schools, trains, roads, and water treatment plants at a pretty steady pace. Not fast, not impressive compared to other European countries, but steady. Then, around the turn of the millennium, that stopped. The country kept growing, the infrastructure didn't. Take housing. Britain built an average of 350,000 homes a year in the 1960s. Today, it builds around 200,000. The population has grown by over 20 million people since then. The maths doesn't work. You can't add 20 million people to a country and build fewer homes than you did when the population was 40 million, and then act surprised when there's a housing crisis. Hospitals? Britain has roughly the same number of hospital beds today as it did in 2000, but the population is 9 million larger, and the average age of that population is significantly older. Older populations need more healthcare, not less. So the system that was already stretched in 2000 is now stretched across millions more people with greater needs. Doctors' surgeries? There are fewer today than there were 15 years ago. Schools, thousands have closed, while the under-18 population has grown. Railway capacity, roads, water infrastructure, all built for a country that stopped existing somewhere around the early 2000s. This is where the conversation usually goes sideways, because the easy explanation, the one that gets thrown around at dinner tables and in newspaper columns, is that all of this is because of immigration. The population grew, new people arrived, the system couldn't cope. And it's true that immigration is part of the growth story. Net migration to the UK hit a record 745,000 in 2022. That's a genuinely large number. Over the last 25 years, around 5 of the 9 million population increase has come from net migration. That's real, it's measurable, and it matters. But here's what the argument misses. The problem isn't that people came to Britain. The problem is that Britain stopped building for anyone, including its own existing citizens. Consider this. Between 1950 and 1980, the UK added about 10 million people to its population. During that same period, it built nearly 6 million new homes. That's roughly 1 new home for every 2 people added. Housing kept up with population, and in some decades actually outpaced it. Between 2000 and 2025, the UK added about 9 million people. During that same period, it built around 3 million new homes. That's 1 new home for every 3 people added. The ratio collapsed, not because too many people arrived, but because the country stopped building at the rate it used to. If you'd told a British housing planner in 1965 that in the 2020s the country would be building fewer homes per year than it did in the 1960s, they'd have assumed something catastrophic had happened. A war, a depression, a collapse. None of those things happened. Britain just quietly decided, through a combination of policy choices, planning laws, and political cowardice, that building was too hard, which is a genuinely impressive achievement when you think about it. The same country that built most of Victorian London in 40 years now can't finish a single railway line in 20. So why did Britain stop building? This is where it gets interesting. And if you're finding any of this useful, subscribe. It helps more than the algorithm would like to admit. The answer is layered. In the 1980s, Margaret Thatcher's government sold off large parts of the social housing stock through the Right to Buy scheme. Tenants could purchase their council homes at a steep discount. Millions did. It was wildly popular. Understandably, Getting a cheap house from the government is pretty much everyone's dream scenario. The problem came later, when the government realized it had sold off millions of homes and hadn't built anything to replace them. Oops. Over time, the entire social housing sector shrank by more than 500,000 units. In the 1990s and 2000s, planning laws became increasingly restrictive. Greenbelt protections expanded. Local councils gained more power to block development. Neighborhood groups, often homeowners protecting their property values, could delay or kill projects through legal challenges. The system became so complicated that getting permission to build anything significant started taking 5 to 10 years minimum. Major infrastructure projects routinely took 15 or 20. Meanwhile, the NHS, education, and transport networks faced a decade of austerity after the 2008 financial crisis. Capital spending, the money you actually need to build new hospitals and schools and stations, was cut dramatically. Maintenance was deferred, expansion projects were cancelled. The country didn't just stop building new things, it stopped maintaining the old ones. And running alongside all of this, the population kept growing, not just through immigration, but through longer life expectancy, lower infant mortality, and people living in smaller households. The number of single-person households in the UK has nearly doubled since 1970. That means even without a single immigrant arriving, Britain would need more housing today than it did 50 years ago for the same number of people. This is the part that almost never gets said in the political argument. Immigration is one factor in Britain's capacity crisis. It's not the main one. The main one is 40 years of deliberate underinvestment in the infrastructure that makes a country livable. Blaming migrants for a housing shortage that started before most of them arrived is basically blaming Bro for being the last one on a full train, when the real problem is that nobody bothered to add more carriages. But here's why the immigration narrative keeps winning. It's emotionally satisfying. It gives people something to blame that they can see and name. A politician can stand up and promise to reduce migration, and voters feel like something is being done. Meanwhile, every government for the last 30 years has absolutely fumbled the actual job, which is building enough houses, hospitals, and schools for the country that already exists. Actually, fixing the capacity problem requires building millions of homes, dozens of hospitals, thousands of schools, and entire new transport networks. It requires reforming planning law, overruling local objection, spending hundreds of billions of pounds, and waiting a decade or more to see results. No politician wins an election on that pitch. So the country gets the argument it can handle, instead of the one that would actually fix the problem. Migration becomes the symbol. The underlying issue stays untouched, and the result is the Britain you live in today. A country that genuinely feels full, not because it has too many people, but because it was built for fewer of them and never updated. Where every system is running at or beyond capacity. Where the doctor's waiting room is packed, and the train is packed, and the school is packed. Not because there's been an invasion, but because there's been 4 decades of neglect. The tragic thing is that this is a solvable problem. Other countries have done it. Germany absorbed over 1 million refugees in 2015 and 2016 without its infrastructure collapsing, because it had spent the previous decades actually building things. France has more hospital beds per capita than Britain. The Netherlands, with significantly higher population density, has shorter waiting times for a doctor. Ireland, with similar immigration pressures, is building homes faster per capita than the UK. None of these countries have a magic formula. They just kept building. Britain could too, if it wanted to. The question isn't whether the country is full. It isn't. The question is whether it's still willing to build for the one it's actually becoming.